You're listening to the Soju Sessions, episode 11 on the Soju Talk Nation podcast feed. For a lot of fans, our introduction to the world of K-pop was primarily through groups. From their coordinated outfits to synchronized choreography and the harmonizing vocals, our initial impressions were made by a collection of talented singers and dancers coming together, capturing our hearts and souls. Occasionally, a member will venture off on their own, challenging their creativity and exploring music as a solo performer. It's only fitting that just for today, I go solo. Coming up, Tiffany, AleXa, and my solo adventures. Welcome to a solo adventures edition of Soju Sessions this week. I'm your host, Crispy Wonton, or simply just Anton, and I'm going solo low today. Yes, I did that. I apologize to everyone who had to bear with that. So this week's episode was inspired just by my musings around Instagram, seeing Tiffany promote Chicago, and then seeing AleXa and the final episode of HDIGH, How Did I Get Here, the podcast she does with Jay Park. And it got me to think and reflect on how I came across these two artists and why I feel so connected to them and their Asian/Korean American experience. And what was it about my experiences that were similar and different that resonated with me, that helped me make sense of the world around me and really wanted to connect with this form of entertainment and these entertainers. So I figured it would be fitting to do this episode solo, considering both of them are soloists. And I did some research on kind of their histories, starting from Tiffany and Sonishide, Girls' Generation, to AleXa and everything that she's been up to with her podcast with Jay and kind of her experience and what that means with the modern advancements with technology and connectivity. So yeah, let's just start with kind of a look back at the very, very beginning. Girls' Generation, SNSD. The group debuted back in 2007 with Into the New World. An enormous hit, an enormous success with such resonance throughout Korea, leaving a cultural imprint over the past decade plus, over 10 years now. And, the song has changed in meaning and significance over time with just the way that it's used to celebrate, different moments in Korean history over the past 10 years, whether that was a movement with feminism in all parts of Asia, and also just used to highlight certain events, using a female-forward message. But I do think it's important to start here because Tiffany, grew up in a time where she was given the song and she just wanted to do her best. And she really just wanted to, make it big in a group, following the structures of K-pop, following the structures of the K-pop system. And at the time, she even says it herself in many interviews that she didn't really know that she could have a voice and agency to kind of direct her creativity. And it's just interesting that this song kind of speaks to that independence and finding yourself, specifically as a female. For me, I didn't find this song until much later. I would say I wasn't super aware of the song until perhaps like 2017. I knew the song existed. I knew the song was used in different formats and different ways to celebrate Korea. But Girls' Generation to me was a lot of their more typical K-pop songs. I Got a Boy, Lionheart, and Into the New World was still a remnant of kind of the past, kind of like the old ballads that were made in Korea at that time that were kind of like national anthems-ish in a way. But yeah, I think just looking back on it now, being a little bit older, having a little bit more resonance for the past, I think it's a really important place to start, especially for Tiffany's journey and the way that she kind of evolved as a person and as an artist over time. So then it got me to think about when I first discovered Girls' Generation, and it was G. It was in 2010, so a little bit after the song had released. But it was during college. A friend had just passed around this music video, right? It was the early days of YouTube. And I watched it, and I said, wow, this feels like an anime. Because up until that point, my only experience with Asians in culture, Asians in media, Asians in entertainment was through anime. And even though, again, completely different mediums, you have animation versus, real people, it still meant something. It was still kind of cool to see Asian people being represented in some form of media in a different way than they have been in Western movies, in movies in the US, right? I think the only positive representations of Asian people at that time were through martial arts movies. And even then, few and far between them. I think Jackie Chan is probably the biggest name in martial arts in the United States at that time. I think Jet Li was still there, but again, Jet Li didn't have as many movies, and I think he was still older at that point in the late 2000s, 2010s. So still a lot of change to get representation and visibility with Asian culture. But with K-pop, there was an immediacy with seeing successful Asian people do music, something that in the United States just did not exist. I think for me, that's what resonated the most. And when I think about just being a young person in my formative years, and I asked myself, how important was it for me during that time to see Asian people in entertainment? And honestly, I probably wasn't super aware of it. I can say that I wanted to see a lot of kung fu movies and martial arts things. Anime was very important again. But I did have an intuitive sense of wanting to see people I related to physically, people who look like me. I didn't know how to express that. And I'm sure, during that developmental period in anyone's life, it's really hard to put words and articulate something so meaningful to anybody, whether that's emotionally, whether that's psychologically, whether that's just this innate feeling of wanting to connect with something. Not finding the words is common, right? It's easy. It's not so easy to put things together when you just haven't experienced the world as much as you would later in life. So, kind of a long way to say, I think G was a really amazing entry point into the world of K-pop, into the world of Korean entertainment. And even though I am not Korean myself, I am Filipino and Chinese, I do think that there is an importance to cultural adjacent experiences where, yes, Korean culture does have its very specific customs and language, of course, but there are a lot of shared experiences and shared values, right, amongst all Asian cultures. And I do think seeing that represented on TV, seeing that represented in some form of media, did mean a lot, at least to form my personal connection and identity to what it meant to be Asian, to be Asian American. And so, as I got older, I was in and out of K-pop. I didn't become a super fan until late in the 2010s, right? I would say if I had to give it a year time frame, 2016 was when I became very cognizant. I think that was only because my friends were really into Big Bang, and it was just very sad for them when members started to go to the military. So, I was there, I understood. But then hearing kind of the different stories and histories of different members throughout K-pop and, Girls' Generation being mentioned and then discovering Tiffany, I think it really piqued my interest in wanting to learn more, right? So digging in deeper to Tiffany's backstory and seeing that she was Korean American and seeing that she grew up essentially American, it was something I wanted to explore much more and really connect with as I was starting to form my more adult grown-up identity and really trying to connect with my heritage and the importance of what that means to see people who look like me succeed in the world. A little bit of history on Tiffany. She was born in San Francisco. She moved to Southern California. When she moved to Southern California, she grew up in Diamond Bar, which is about 30 to 40 minutes west of Los Angeles. And then she was encouraged by her brother at the age of 15 to participate in a singing competition where she was spotted by an SM representative. She auditioned, was accepted as a trainee, and 3 weeks later moved to South Korea. All right, if you can just imagine the whirlwind of events of a teenager, a 15-year-old person going to a country that they knew very little about, even though they spoke a little bit of Korean, even though they spoke a little bit of the native language, they themselves are ethnically that culture, but still it's an enormous transition, an enormous risk, right? To kind of uplift your entire life during a period in which you're still learning about yourself and how to be a person. I mean, thinking back to when I was 15, I honestly can't tell you that I could have been responsible for myself in any way. So for her to go essentially by herself and to figure it all out was incredible. An incredible part of her story, right? All of this kind of backstory is on the internet. It's all very much like available, but I think one of the resources that I found that I actually had seen a number of years ago when it first came out was her interview with Zach Sang. He did a podcast with her back in 2018, and it's an excellent interview. It's about 50 minutes, and she really goes into her backstory. She goes into her time with SNSD and her choice to go solo, her choice to leave SM, right? She doesn't make any hot takes about the industry per se, but she does talk around the fact that the system needs to change, that there are things within the trainee system, within the constructs of K-pop, that they do work, but also it's not the only way to do things. Go check out the interview. It's on YouTube. It's probably one of my favorite pieces of, I don't know, like historical reference to just how people see the world of K-pop and how like a Korean American and Asian American comes back and reflects on their time in a culture that is drastically different than Western cultures, where the emphasis is so much on collectivism and doing as you're told, and then understanding that she has to tread the line between her upbringing, which is Asian American, and the individual spirit to be creative, to find her own way, and yet kind of reconcile that with a lot of the traditional experiences of being Asian in an Asian country. Some of my favorite things in that interview really went to the details of her relationships and how she is very much in the lives of her members. I think her and her members have such a strong sisterly bond over the course of 14 years, I would say. I think it's about 14 years now since they debuted. And I think it's just an amazing journey that she's able to, maintain that sisterly bond with them. And this was in 2018, so 3 years ago. If you followed Tiffany, if you followed any of the Girls' Generation members on their social medias over the past few years, you can definitely tell that they are tight. I think they routinely, or every year, they do their anniversary get together with amazing photos and just everything. But yeah, I think it really just speaks to the relationship she's built and kind of a little bit of luck that she was able to be successful with them, and that it meant something to be together, and that meant something that once they're older, they're still able to come together and celebrate kind of their time being Girls' Generation, being the nation's girl group. So some of the themes in the Zach Sang interview were about authenticity and finding her own voice, experimenting with the limits of what she can and can't do, and really just pushing her agency, especially in a culture that is so collectivist, which is so driven by you do as you're told, you are humble in your experiences, but also, her reconciling the fact that she is Korean American. And I think that's really fascinating, that one of the main points that she said was, you don't have to necessarily break the rules. You can learn the rules. You can learn whatever situation you're in. And once you've infiltrated, you can change the rules. You can make new ones. And I think that's just a really interesting blend of kind of the Western individualism, where you're a trailblazer, you find your own path, but also the Eastern Asian collectivism of, being part of a larger cause, being part of a larger group for the betterment of the group, for the betterment of kind of the objective, right? Everyone has a shared objective. And I just thought that was interesting that she was just so eloquently able to put that together and communicate that to Zach. Because I think what's really cool about the Zach Sang interview, and even the people who were on the show, his other co-hosts, was that they were very clear that they are coming from a Western market perspective. And, oftentimes it's difficult for even myself to zoom out to think that, why does someone in the West get access to someone like BTS or Blackpink? Or Twice coming up with their performances for the new song this summer. And we forget that, well, at least me personally, I forget that not everyone is coming at it with the same level of knowledge and experience and everyday exposure. And I always have to check myself and ask myself, am I too close to K-pop? Am I too close to the experience? And I have to remember to zoom out. And that interviews like this are a really nice way to gain perspective and to really hear questions of people wanting to grow and expand their knowledge about the genre, about the culture. I think Zach does an amazing job of paying respects to what Tiffany has experienced, to Korean culture, to Asian culture, of what he knows about humility and collectivism, but then also really brings her into wanting to share and open up about a few things. One of the things I think was very telling was just her time, as a trainee. I think she did talk around it a little bit, where, she wanted to say things were hard. She wanted to say she was restricted by a few things, but she also wanted to pay respects and be grateful for her whole experiences. Zach did try to push a little bit and ask her if she regretted anything during her time, during her almost 20 years of being a trainee, being part of Girls' Generation, and then still working in Korea. And I think she did a nice job answering it, where she says to the effect of, she is the sum of her experiences. She doesn't regret anything that happened to her, even if things were hard, even if things were difficult, even if she was, to our standard, treated poorly, right? And I think, like she says, you have to learn the system, you have to learn the game. And I think it's just really important, because oftentimes, even myself, I still get into this mindset of thinking about the world as this dichotomy of right and wrong, where I think Tiffany does a really nice job of saying, well, there's a gray area. Some things, sometimes you experience things and you have to do things in order to fix them, in order to kind of hold up a mirror against it and say, hey, I did this way. I think it could be done better. I think there's other ways to do this. And then for me, when I'm watching an interview like this, I always have to check myself and ask myself, why is it that I seek out an Asian American experience? What is so similar to my experience, even though I'm not an entertainer, even though I'm just, a kid in California who perhaps may have very similar experiences, which I always like to go back. I have friends who say they went to high school with Tiffany who are adjacent. So in a way, I kind of grew up similar to Tiffany. But yeah, so I always ask myself, why does this resonate so much with me? And I think for me, it's having these messages being put out for other cultures to see, for kind of the bouncing off of ideas and finding similarities. So Zach himself saying, giving suggestions of what he thinks of the expanse of creativity, but then also Tiffany kind of saying those are all great ideas. Let me bring you back to Korea. Maybe we can workshop some things. I think there's a humility in both of their sides in saying, let's come together and figure out a better way to do this, but also acknowledge that a lot of success has happened because of the systems and structures in place that have already occurred. Again, I don't really think that there's a perfect answer to everything, but I do think opening up these conversations is really important. And I think, asking these questions, not being dismissive of someone else just because they're either from a different culture, or even if they're asking a question out of a point of view of ignorance. I mean, for me, like, I don't know everything. I don't know everything about so many things, about so many cultures, and yet I love to learn, and I'm okay with myself, like, coming from a point of ignorance, and just being okay with that, especially when speaking to someone who has far more expertise than me. And I think there's a level of humility and a level of growth that we can all experience interacting and exchanging ideas with people in that way. There was something kind of important with what I noticed how Tiffany was talking about her experience being Korean American in Korea. She didn't explicitly say this in her interview, but what I got from it was that she was constantly code switching. And I think that's just something that not necessarily is a newer revelation in how we engage and interact with people, but I think it's something that has been named and is very much an adaptive way of how we should be looking at the world, right? Because as the world has expanded with the pandemic over the year and everyone forced to be on the internet, we are far more connected than we've ever been. And I think that also leads to the positive consequences of cross-cultural interaction and commingling, right? And then what's kind of, a great consequence of it all is that now someone like me who's multicultural can, be authentically American in different contexts, right? But then when I have to speak with people from other parts of the world, or even with my relatives in the Philippines, I have to code switch and I have to find adaptive ways to meet them halfway in order to communicate. And I think that's a really important message that Tiffany subtly conveys in this entire conversation, is that oftentimes, especially growing up in more Western cultures, there is this almost defensive sense of individualism where you don't really know how to make sense of the world yet, and when someone comes at you a certain kind of way, you become confrontational, you become defensive, you in a way lash out and clap back when not necessarily people are clapping at you. And I think Tiffany really makes a nice point of saying, without actually saying it, that she constantly had to code switch, that she had to figure out the culture in Korea. She had to adapt to it. She had to switch the way that she thought and spoke and interacted with the people around her in order for her to succeed, while maintaining what makes her who she is. That authenticity, which is Korean American, which is having that perspective of experimenting and taking risk. And I think just hearing her story and hearing this type of storytelling really resonates with my personal experience. And I asked myself, like, when were the times where I often had to code switch and didn't even know it? A couple of examples spring to mind would be in school, interacting with other people from different backgrounds. In college, especially when you're exposed to so many different people. And then in grad school, when everyone is there for a very specific objective, but also comes in with their personal histories, their baggage, and their reason for why they are here to study or change the world or excel in whatever professional endeavor they chose while they're in grad school, right? I just wanted to kind of put a bow at the end of kind of this conversation with something that Zach said. I'll quote him directly. So he says near the end of their conversation, as they're talking about perfection, right? Because they do start talking about the life of an idol, the difference between an idol and an artist, and kind of the pressures of being perfect as far as in the Korean entertainment industry and the structures. And he says something kind of poetic. So I wrote it down. He says, "It's only perfect because you can replace perfection. You can't replace human. You don't form a relationship with a perfect robot. You form a relationship with somebody with a pulse and independent thoughts and experiences, and you can share emotions and talk to about things." And I thought that was so beautiful because, I mean, what are we all doing here with regards to entertainment and K-pop and talking to each other on the internet? It's to find those human connections, make relationships, and share emotions, share thoughts. I think this really connects with everything that we do here at Soju Talk, whether that's listening to the podcast, Doug Warren and Anita, having that friendly bond from their personal relationship, bringing that onto the show, bringing that into the world of K-pop and news and music analysis, and then continuing on with the Discord and everyone communicating so immediately, so readily, all the time, bouncing ideas off of each other, bouncing points of view and perspectives off of each other. And I do think that it's something to remember, to make sure, like me personally, that I don't lose that, because I think oftentimes just seeing text and seeing people typing on Discord, there is a level of disconnect that me personally I experience often, and I try to do my best to humanize kind of the words behind what I see on screen, and remember that there are people behind that. So cheers to Tiffany for helping me at least kind of refocus that this week with her experience with Chicago. Just to kind of wrap up Chicago, she was cast in Chicago as of this year, February 16th, 2021. Kind of amazing how everything worked out for her. Because this interview that she did with Zach was in 2018. She had moved to LA to pursue acting, singing, and really make her imprint on the Western media market, whether that was music or television. And then the pandemic happened, circumstances changed, and she moved back to Korea for everything that happened, only to get kind of the role of a lifetime playing Roxy Hart in Chicago, which I have seen the movie. I've never seen it live, but I know the character and all the photos of her. She looks gorgeous. I really hope one day, perhaps when the world opens up again, I get lucky enough to see the Korean rendition of Chicago, to see Tiffany on stage do that. But sometimes things align, sometimes they don't. But I do hope for the best for her, and it's really kind of amazing, like her journey to get to where she's at today. And she seems like she's thriving and doing excellent and wonderful. Before we get on to the next topic, we're going to take a little break and do a really hard transition. So we're going to take a break, and then we'll come back to talk about AleXa. And we're back. Thank you for coming back to join us on the last part of this solo adventures conversation with me. Again, like I said at the top of the show, kind of the main inspiration for why I wanted to talk about AleXa and Tiffany this week was just seeing them on Instagram and all their socials, and then kind of reflecting on their Korean American experiences and times when they were able to share kind of their inner thinkings about what's important to them, their cultural identity, and then why that resonated so much with me. And kind of the questions I had for myself of why being Asian American and seeing an Asian American be successful in entertainment means so much, and why me personally, want to share that message with other people. So coming up, we got AleXa. This week was her finale for her show that she does on Dive Studios with Jay Park from Day 6. HDIGH. How did I get here? Episode number 70, it ended this week, but I think it's more on a hiatus, is how they described it. So perhaps there'll be future episodes. Kind of a quick rundown on AleXa and her history. So she was born in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Her heritage is that she is Korean. She was adopted by no, she is Korean American. She's Korean Russian. Sorry. Her mother is Korean, who was adopted by Americans, and her dad is Russian American. So there's her ethnic background and her heritage. As a child, she took dancing lessons in various genres: ballet, jazz, hip hop, and tap. She did theater in college. She was a theater kid growing up. And then she started an Instagram before being an idol, before going to Korea, to cover K-pop songs and do choreography. And then she went to Korea for Produce 48. She signed with ZB labels, and the rest is history. I think she has really done a nice job transitioning her time from that competition show into her solo career, being a personality, being an influencer, but also kind of being that bridge for a lot of international fans. She does speak American. She does speak English and does help for people like me, Americans like me, to connect with her story. So I think that's kind of the reason why I feel like I favor AleXa's content and favor AleXa as an artist, is because there is that language connectivity, right? There is that lower barrier of entry in which I can, connect with her journey, her story, and her history. So the show she does on Dive Studios with Jay is called HDIGH, How Did I Get Here? And I was trying to think about the best way to describe this show. But, there's a lot of people in the nation. There's a lot of super smart people in the nation. So I asked Therese, and she gave me a couple scattered thoughts here and there. I wrote them down. I didn't edit anything. So let's see if I can try to eloquently put into words what she had said. She said it was just Jay bantering with the producers to start the show. So it was just Jay by himself, and he didn't know what to do. He was kind of lost. And then they brought AleXa in to give him someone to bounce off of. And it was basically a show where they wanted to know something. They wanted to figure something out. So they Googled it, and they, bounced ideas off of each other and really just tried to expand their knowledge base, right? Talk about what they already knew about the topic, whether that was founded in their personal experiences, perhaps stories they heard from other people, but kind of bringing in that perspective and then kind of reinforcing with some facts. Loose facts, however you want to put it, whether that was through Google, Wikipedia. I think it's just a really nice conversational show where you do kind of break down the barriers of what it is to be an idol. It kind of humanizes them, that we're all people. Nobody's perfect. Nobody knows everything. Nobody's eloquent all the time. Nobody has this expansive knowledge about every single thing. And I think it's just amazing that, they don't have to know everything. They can also come from a point of, they heard something from a friend and this is their knowledge base. I think Jay was talking about music being genetic in one episode, and then his music teacher saying it had more to do with like the shape of your skull. Whether or not that's true or not, I mean, it's part of his experience, a part of his life story. So I think it's a nice way to think about how the people in our lives and our experiences kind of paint our knowledge bases. So for me, when I watch a show like this, or I listen to a show like this, because I typically just like to listen to podcasts instead of watching things, I always have to think about like, am I compartmentalizing what's happening here? Like what I'm listening to, the types of conversations that I'm having. Am I being objective? Because without sounding pretentious, without sounding like a snob, I do pride myself on wanting to be more informed, more academic in various aspects of life, right? And I will be honest, certain things like astrology and horoscopes and ghosts, yes, Therese, I'm talking to you, I tend to roll my eyes at. But again, it's not me closing myself off to people who may think that way. It's just I personally don't have any affinity for any of that stuff. And a show like this, even though sometimes it's all over the place, it's got a lot of hectic energy, it's a nice reminder that, we're all different. We all have different backgrounds. We all see things from a different point of view, and that's okay. That's what helps paint the world a different color. In K-pop, we all have different colors. The members of your favorite groups pride themselves on being unique individuals while also adhering to the same objectives, whether that's creatively, or musically, or just any other outlet. I do think it's just a nice reminder for my own personal humility that other people come from a different knowledge base and a different set of experiences. And I think it helps also just to be a better person, to accept new people and new ideas into your life. So, HDIGH, how did I get here? They always open up the show with kind of their tagline. It's welcome to How Did I Get Here, where we live our best lives on the internet, then come out on the other side knowing more, but not feeling that much smarter. And I think that's a really cool way to look at, experiencing new information and trying to better yourself, right? Like, everyone has a way of looking at the world. Everyone wants to be inspired. Everyone wants to also be introspective and explore new things about themselves. And I think Jay and AleXa getting together to do this really meant a lot for their personal growth as artists and as people. Kind of looping it back to like our main theme of Asian American identity and representation. I think for me, I am a little bit older than them, so I may not have the same life experiences as them right now, but I do see the importance of developing this sense of self. There's an episode where they do talk about identity and what does it mean to be a grown-up, and they touched on this concept in psychology called emerging adulthood, right? So this idea of you're no longer in college, but you're also not like a 40-year-old with a family. You're kind of that in-between range of like 25 to 35 and still kind of figuring things out, emerging as an adult. And I think it's really cool that they're able to like pull these things in, because for me, I studied psychology in college, so this is something that I'm very familiar with. But to hear kind of the layman's perspective and to hear just like friends talking about like this concept to help understand the world and help understand where their place is in the world, it's really reassuring that people are doing their best to strive to be better and strive to make sense of things. So I do have to like think about and ask myself, like, are there people in this world who their defense mechanism is to like act a certain kind of way, whether that's to be out of pocket or to come at you aggressively? But what does that mean about kind of the things they're struggling with and their outlets or their lack of outlets? And I think with Jay and AleXa, with their lives being so hectic and busy, being musicians, idols, singers, dancers, having so many responsibilities with their labels, I think it's a really nice outlet and something that I hope other people are able to look at from the point of view of having a place to go to figure these things out. Because I do think oftentimes life, whatever your responsibilities are, whether you work full-time 9 to 5 in an office, or you're a full-time student, or you're taking care of a family, I do think life gets in the way of moments of self-reflection and finding that friend to talk to. And for me, a show like HDIGH, I don't love it all the time, but I see the value in it. I see the value in Jay and AleXa's relationship, and it's heartwarming. I hope these are lessons and strategies that other people can see as being helpful and adaptive to just making sense of the world. Because the world is complicated. Sometimes things aren't easy. Oftentimes things aren't easy. And sometimes you just need a friend to bounce ideas off of. So episode 70 of How Did I Get Here is the finale. It's kind of the end of at least this era or this season of them doing this show. After listening to it, kind of the theme that I pulled out of their conversation was resilience. The show was mainly about Q&A, question and answers, and then also looking forward and looking to future projects for both Jay and AleXa. For Jay, he was really reflecting on how much he's grown over the past year plus, even over the course of his career, taking chances and taking a risk. I think the phrase was that risk it for the biscuit was something he said on the show. And it also got me to think about like the risk that I took in my life. And also like finding like a space to take risks, because I think that's also another important factor we don't typically think about when we take a risk. Sometimes we're risk averse for any number of reasons, whether that's environmental, whether that's circumstance, whether that's just responsibilities in our lives that make it difficult for us to take risk. For me, I think being risk averse has a lot to do with self-assurance. I just don't think I ever had like that true like self-assurance to like take larger risks. I think the largest risk I ever took was dropping out of grad school. And I think I still don't know yet if that was the correct choice. I do think it was probably the correct choice, but I'm still figuring it out. But at least I can think back and reflect on that, right? And I feel like Jay does a really nice job of, in his own way, putting those thoughts together and then really culminating that idea in this episode with resilience. And then for AleXa, she reflected a lot about just her time being a host and just finding answers on the internet. I think the way I described it was, two friends, two kids wandering the internet, looking for answers, but eventually just following down various Wikipedia rabbit holes. Sometimes they remember many things and pieces of knowledge that are life-changing. Sometimes they don't. But I do think that's very in line with AleXa's personality and her energy, which is pretty cool. Yeah, and they ultimately ended on a question that was submitted by the audience, read by the producer. She says, "What's something you think every person should experience at least once in a lifetime?" And Jay's answer was being on stage, being in front of people that respect your music, singing along to your songs, the feeling of performing in front of people that have love for you. And for AleXa, it was to experience heartbreak. You're going to learn why that person was not meant to be with you, not meant to be in your life, but also you're going to learn about your worth, learn about your self-worth and what you deserve. I think both of those answers, even though they do seem kind of different, do relate, because ultimately it's about reflecting on what you need as a person. So for Jay, it's finding that unconditional love from people that recognize him, that see his art form and the work and effort he put into this form of expression. Whereas for AleXa, it's also finding your self-worth, but also finding that your self-worth from an experience that helps you reflect on yourself. I think when I think about projects that I've attempted, accomplished, failed at, or like moments in my life, like are there moments where I feel this similar sense of accomplishment, whether that's being on stage or perhaps even heartbreak, and reflecting on that for myself? I would say definitely. I mean, I think this podcast kind of does that for me with like being on stage. Definitely not at the scale of being an idol or being a Korean entertainer, but I think just having a voice and speaking and putting it out on the internet, sharing my opinions with people, talking to friends, kind of expanding on ideas, and then people listening. I think I don't have any delusion that I'm reaching like hundreds of millions of people on the internet, but I think I shouldn't say small, but the number of people that do listen, I think it's really important. It means a lot to me when I do see like that number change and like go up, right? So yeah, I think having that feeling that people have love for you is something I relate to with Jay. With regards to AleXa and heartbreak, I'm older. I've experienced heartbreak. I know what that's like. Yeah, on the server, some of you may know me as the person who has unending love for many female artists. Um, a lot of that is sincere. Some of that is exaggerated. I'll let you decide, where that line is drawn. But I do think my experiences with heartbreak and past relationships have helped me cope with this idea of like self-worth and just like what I deserve as a person. And I always like to go back to this idea when looking for a relationship or someone I want to be romantically involved with is setting high standards, in that this person has to be a quality person, a great person, but also being mindful of my expectations, setting those expectations to the point where they can meet me at, right? Like having high expectations and thinking every single person is going to meet that, whether that's physically, whether that's intellectually, whether that's even having the same interest, I think is not a wrong way to go about looking for love and romance. But I think it's going to be really hard if you can't meet the person halfway, because a relationship requires two people. And if you expect that much from them, they might expect a lot from you, and those things may never align. But if you can meet each other halfway, if you can compromise, then I think you can at least start something and learn about yourself. Learn about what you need with regards to being in a relationship, meeting someone, and falling in love. So, yeah, that's my sappy moment for this week. Yeah, I think that closes things out. I think the last question I do want to attempt to answer. So Kesh asked me this. So Kesh on the server, hello Kesh, how are you? She asked me, do I think the fact that that I'm Asian has anything to do with my affinity for K-pop? The answer is yes. I think I've answered that throughout this episode, but I do want to just restate this whole idea of connectivity, right? Where Tiffany's experience and AleXa's experiences are vastly different, at least from what I can tell so far. Tiffany started back in the early 2000s. AleXa came into the scene, I think, after she went to college. So I think after she was 18. Two different eras, two different generations of people. Where do I fall into place? How do I find myself between both of these two experiences? It's the fact that it's an Asian American experience. It's about the fact that both of them are code switching to be successful. And for me, I think it's really important to be represented with, having an Asian person be successful, and seeing that there's different ways and different paths to doing things. Because I think still around the world, the perception of being Asian and success is you're a doctor, you're an engineer, you're doing everything for your family and only rigidly for your family, without any flexibility to your personal desires, aspirations, or dreams. But I think stories and experiences like Tiffany's and AleXa's do a really nice job of portraying that there's other ways to do things, that you can make up your own rules, but within reason, right? I think just inherently being Asian American, I'm not going to be hyper confrontational with my family, with my, personal achievements and success, like in the workplace. Not to say that I'm not aggressive with trying to find professional success, but I think there is still that level of humility and, being less confrontational, I think is the only way I can put that. To kind of answer Kesh's question of my affinity to K-pop, it's because, I said this earlier, there is a cultural adjacency to Korean culture and just the greater Asian cultural experience. And I think that means a lot to see success in entertainment, even if, it's a different language, it's a different background. For me, I think it's really helpful kind of to build, my personal sense of confidence that we can be represented and we can have stories told about us in a more positive light. And yeah, I think yeah, you know what? I'm just gonna leave it there. I think I could go on another monologue, and I'm just going to kind of wrap things up by saying, seeing Tiffany and seeing AleXa thrive and be successful in their own special ways has done a lot for me to connect with different stories. And for me, I'm always about storytelling. That's kind of how I make sense of the world. That's how I connect with other people, and it just is a way for me to make sense of like my own direction and what I need to succeed and how I want to succeed in the future. So, yeah, thanks everyone for listening to me monologue for about 50 minutes. I hope you guys learned something. I hope you guys felt more connected to me and learned a little bit more about Tiffany and AleXa. Thanks for listening, and thanks for joining me, Crispy, Anton, on this solo adventure on the Soju sessions this week. Subscribe on YouTube, follow on Spotify or your preferred podcast platform, and continue the conversation on the Soju Talk K-pop podcast Discord. I'm Crispy, and this has been the Soju Sessions.